forecasted revenue for this year about 2 million. Yeah, that's.
All right. I'm Derek Kessen. I'm from Chicago in the United States. I'm the managing partner of Heron Ventures, which is a venture capital fund, also with branch offices in Nairobi, Kenya. So we've been around since 2019. Before that, I was in the C-suite of an investment bank that I didn't found, which had about 350 people. So we're just getting started in terms of forming a new C-suite, but I was in a C-suite before that.
I'm Daniel Lar. Been working in IT my whole professional life. So started working 27 years ago, but I've been part of a C-suite roughly for 20 years. Currently, I'm responsible for several businesses which are owned by a public company. I oversee 7 business units with roughly 600 people in 3 countries. And it's in software services, just to make it clear.
So he's the small business. It's up here. No, I'm just kidding. Welcome, guys. Thank you all for sitting up here. So this is going to be really highly conversational, and the structure of this time will be I have some questions. My goal is to get to the point where it's a little bit more of the not so obvious things that you guys can learn some from their experiences up here and challenges. And then we're going to actually save the last 20 minutes will be for question and answer. And so feel free to write down some questions because we're going to have some time and some space for that, okay? All right, wonderful. Okay, so to kick us off, I think one of the things that a lot of business owners are trying to figure out, especially as a startup or a small business, is what are some key indicators that you identify to be able to start hiring in C-suite employees? And so I think one of the things that I would love to hear from you guys is how would you differentiate a director role or a VP role from a C-suite level role? And how do you know when it is the right time for your business to have somebody in a C-suite role instead of a director or VP role? Any of you can go. Yeah.
Okay, I can start, and I think I have a built-in advantage in the sense that being part of a large corporation, there's already some best practices there. So some of them I figured out, but many of them were given to me. So I'm thankful for that. So for me, actually we call it leadership team, and because it's about seven business units under 3 brands, basically differentiating when somebody is at that level is somebody who can take P&L responsibility. And what I mean by that, just to make it clear, is somebody who can also drive revenue growth and is able to generate future revenues for that business unit. It doesn't necessarily mean that that person has to be the best salesperson, but he needs to have the vision and be able to take the responsibility to basically drive revenues and also manage the cost for a group of people, which usually is 40 up to 100 something. So when somebody is willing to do that and to take that responsibility, we call that person the managing director, but that is in my team what would be the equivalent to C-level. In your case, somebody who can really take responsibility for a business unit, for the revenues, for managing cost, and keeping it growing and profitable.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
I would love to hear from you in regards to, in your business, when it's time to bring someone into a C-level job, what has it looked like navigating bringing someone from within the business up into a C-level job versus going out and hiring externally new talent?
Well, I think there's a difference between entrepreneurs and more risk takers and managers. I'm a manager type in terms of personality. So my tendency naturally has always been to look inside and to develop people and to do it gradually. Now, I cannot say I've always been successful in that because you can develop also blind spots when you work with people close to you and assume that the switch to an MD role, as I call it, is not that as steep, but sometimes it can be steep even when you have been working with somebody for a long time. Now, science or, well, research says that usually outside hires have a lower chance of success than people who are promoted internally. And I think that the main reason why that is when you work with people for a long time, issues of character, you kind of know them. So you can trust somebody's character even though they have to develop in the competence in that area. So my preference has been promoting from within, and in general, the team I work with, I mean, all the team I work with has been very stable over the last 10 years. There are people who have been with me more than 10 years. But nevertheless, even promoting from within can have risks sometimes. And you cannot underestimate how big of a transition that is when somebody really has to take a lot of responsibility on the revenue side, not just managing a team, which is a total different thing. So to me, that's the, let's say, preferred way, and it's also a natural way as a personality.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else have anything that they want to share in regards to how do you know when it is the right time to bring on somebody to a C-suite level, like your business has grown to a point where that is important? Or in general, how would you define the difference? I think it's really helpful to know how people define the difference between a director, VP, and a C-suite level employee.
I can say how we did it.
Yeah.
So when we were very overwhelmed and we needed help, that's when we started looking after a managing director. We wouldn't call them a C-level, I don't know what. For us, when we opened like a new business line, like rental, we needed someone to be in charge with the budgeting, yes, with the P&L. So we had no one from within who had these abilities. So we needed to hire from outside to have the knowledge. But my perception over this subject is that if I were to choose, I would all the time promote from within, because we had a lot of managers who came, stayed for 3 or 4 years, and then left the company because we are so fast changing, and I don't know if they can keep up with the change, or they are not really in charge with the P&L. Actually, this is our case. They cannot really make them profitable, you know, as our expectations. Yeah. And I would like one day to actually say that we promote it from within. But this P&L stuff, it's heavy when you have young people who need to grow.
One of the things that we have talked about and can be a challenge to Romania, but also I think it can actually be a challenge everywhere, is the temptation of bringing in, especially as a startup or a small business, instead of going out and hiring external talent, is focusing on potentially hiring friends or family members or people from your church who have the same values as you. Have any of you guys had experience with this? And I think there's pros and cons. There's benefits and challenges to doing this, but it is very common of what I've learned here in this ecosystem. And so if any of you are willing to share with your experience of that and maybe some things that you would want this audience to know as they're thinking about who they're going to hire, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, we are the experts on this subject because I have my father-in-law as an employee, Ruben's sister, cousins. We started from our friends and family, you know. So yes, it's very challenging.
What are some of those challenges that you've seen without pointing out some
the
people in the room?
first challenge is that you need to fire them. So if you can, yes, really, and it's a really big problem, you know. So you have to live with yourself that maybe sometime you need to fire them. So if you can take this emotionally and have the emotional maturity to do it, then you can work with them. But it's very complicated Because, you know, when you're in family, you really need to define the role and the responsibilities and set clear expectations. And where in the family, you cannot do that easily. I've seen in my experience with me and Ruben in the first year. So we didn't set roles and extra responsibilities, and we had a lot of fighting over this, and we did all the things together. So we can talk all day long if you want, but I don't know to tell you what's the success here. I only can tell you about the challenges.
Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else have anything that they want to share from an experience here?
I can share two things. So going back to my time in helping to lead a mid-sized investment bank, so we had about 350 people, but I would say probably 300 of those people came not just from Chicago, where we lived, but the same area of Chicago. And many of those people went to the same school. And so we had a couple of problems that came from that. One, we didn't have a lot of diversity of thought. So we had people who were raised in the same places, had a lot of the same lived experiences. Maybe they came from the same sort of income levels growing up. So it was a lot of the same type of people. And so there was a lot of diversity of how people might solve problems and things that we were really missing as an organization because we just hired people that we knew. It was as people got older, then their neighbors started having kids, and then we would start hiring our neighbors' kids because we feel like we know that family really well. We can trust their values and all of that. So we realized we were missing something. The second thing is we really lacked accountability. So we found it to be very difficult to hold friends and family members accountable to the objectives that we set for them as employees. So what that ended up leading us to do is we had to actually set a nepotism policy. We actually had to make a rule that we were no longer allowed to hire friends and family except for interns. So they could get some experience for a couple months over the summer and work for us, and then they would have to go find their full-time jobs somewhere else. So that was kind of what that led to, is finally we just had to pull it all the way back and say no more. And then just maybe to put some extra momentum behind what Oana said is, I mean, I have had the experience of having to fire one of my best friends. And so when you hire that person and they are not performing, especially for us, we're a small company still. And so every single person has to be pulling their weight when you're a startup. And so they have to actually have the capabilities. And if I'm not willing to then say, okay, we actually have to let this person go, all of the other people at the company suffer because I'm not strong enough to be able to do that. So I think when you're going into making the decision, I think it might be okay in some instances to hire a friend or a family member, but you really have to be able to know that you will fire them when the time comes, if you need to.
And the family will be upset. Yes, with you.
Family dinner just got awkward.
Yes. And they will think badly of you, and you... Yes, Christmas will be tough.
Christmas is not the same. Anatol?
Well, our business is rather small to talk about C-suite and other titles, big titles, but I hope some in the room will relate to that because not everybody is starting a large company. So we have 30 employees, but before I started my business 8 years ago, I had the privilege to work for 5 years in an American company with 500 employees that then was sold to one of the largest European companies with 22,000 employees with 2 billion in sales. And both companies were family-owned, the previous companies, and I was able to watch closely how the family business they were run. On the first example, one of the greatest lessons where they were the 3 family members were running the business, and for me it was one of the greatest models. And they brought all the competencies, and sometimes they had a lot of contradictions, but never brought business into the family table. They left everything there, and much to say, but I think they didn't have a choice because the policy of the company was that always will stay in the family, and the family would run it, and it was very successful. In the second scenario, I would not give names, but was a lot of family politics, which was very detrimental even to the development of the company. So I got a taste of that. Well, in my company, I didn't hire family members, but I made a mistake of hiring a pastor whom I knew, I respected. He needed a job, and
Empathy really got you.
Yes. Well, I think we have to admit, besides competencies, we are inclined to look for people of trust, especially in our Eastern European context where trust is a lot missing. I think we would rather bring the values and raise probably the competence. Well, in my case, I honestly say there was a big mistake because firing, especially someone who you respect, it's kind of an authority position, it's extremely difficult and painful to fire. I'm actually in the process of that, and it's I will never do it.
This is streaming online right now.
Yes, I know, it's okay. It's okay. He knows it, so it's okay. But I think we just have to be, I think, upfront honest what we expect and have clear job descriptions. And if there is more to wait from that position or person to deliver in terms of values like shepherding, I think it has to be discussed. And in my case, I assumed, but we didn't discuss those clearly. But we were able to talk openly. What are the expectations? What were mine expectations? And I think we are in a healthy transition out. But I honestly say there was probably a mistake. And I think transparency always helps. And I think Romania and Moldova are very community-oriented societies. And also, we have to admit, with such, and maybe you'll tap into that, but sometimes we are just happy to have people around we can trust, and they are there. They have not left. But that's a different topic with the brain drain. And I think we make choices to invest and to reap the results in the long run. We just don't have, I think, the people available. But that's another, I think, cultural, contextual reality, unlike in the Western world, where you have already prepared people with a lot of experience to be brought in.
Right.
Unless maybe you're in Cluj or Bucharest. But in the rest of the country, I don't think it's easy to find ready people just available looking for the jobs you need.
Yeah, I think the brain drain is actually something I've heard quite a bit since I've been here this week. Can you just, or you or anyone who wants to share, just, the brain drain is a real challenge, and maybe just as a moment of definement of what that means is there's, in Romania, a lot of people who get really educated or have a lot of good experience, and if they can, they will go and find a job in another country, maybe another continent, and it doesn't leave a lot of good talent here for hiring, and so that's a challenge that I've heard a lot about, and so I would love to hear from any of you guys, what are some things that you have done to combat that from happening? So maybe one, how do you attract good talent? How do you retain good talent? How do you invest in people internally? What are some of the things that you're doing to either keep some good talent here in the country but with incentives, or to grow up people in your company and get them to stay? So if anybody has any thoughts on the brain drain.
I can start maybe very simple. I think people look, as I shared even yesterday, look for opportunities. When we started our business, the first thing we did, we took our first 6-8 employees and we traveled with them to the Netherlands, where they could see where we would like to be. And they liked the adventure. We invested a lot in them and just sharing with them even a different culture, a different corporate culture, the industry. And I think that was one of the best investments, because people felt treated with an opportunity to grow, but also I think they like to be part of something that is developing. So, but instead of being treated just as an employee, we treated them as team members, and even we involve them even in some decision process. So, for the key members, for the key talent in the team, I think that's very important. They like to be part of something great. So if you show them where you want to be and actually walk with them, or let them walk alongside, that brings a lot of loyalty and commitment. And they are, through the hard times, and the good times together. So for us, those things were very important.
Great answer.
And what I would add, because I think it's a great story about, let's say, a smaller business. What I've seen it also when we were smaller in size and also now. I think at the beginning people do appreciate a lot the coaching and the training and the fact that you give them a perspective. And then as people become more experienced, and there's a book about that we talked about yesterday written by Daniel Pink called Drive. And it's about the science of motivation, what motivates people at the experience level to stay in an environment. And there's 2-3 factors which are really important. One of them is the chance to have more autonomy and also the mastery. So the fact that they can become really good at something and they can be experts in their field, but also that as they grow and they prove their value and competence, they will have more autonomy in deciding what to do and how to invest their time. And basically, as long as the results are great, actually, I have a great leader I know who has this saying, when the numbers are good, meetings are short. So the more, the better performance you get, the less monitoring you get because you gain your trust, you earn your trust, basically. So I think, yeah, at the beginning, it's about really creating a framework for people to learn and to support them in the growth. And they know that if they come to and in our case, also what we're doing, I talked about it yesterday, it's quite particular. It's a combination of services and consultancy and a lot of contact with the customer. And I have to say it's quite hard to get people who have done this at other jobs, though there are other companies doing that. But in our case, 75% of our C-suite is people who started with us from being juniors. It's their first job. And they spent 10, 15 years going up. And in my career, I found out I went through 10 levels, basically, in the corporation to do what I do now. And the fact that you can grow, and there's always growth opportunities and the chances to be autonomous and to do new things, I think that can be more and more motivating as people advance in their career.
That is a really great answer. Thanks for sharing that. Would you be willing to share of a time where you gave someone autonomy too quickly over a role or a department or maybe too much decision-making power? Maybe the incentive was to get them to stay or something like that. But I would love to hear for the room of an example maybe where that didn't go very well.
Well, maybe to come back to the earlier topic about family issues in the company, I didn't have that problem. I had a slightly different problem, and that is maybe to see, not to be objective about people, because I saw myself in them. Does it make sense? So I didn't have any family problems, but I had me problems, because there were a couple of times situations where I really admired some people and they were committed and they had character, but because I saw their level of character, I underestimated the level of competence they needed to move to the next level. And it's one thing to have somebody in the team with you, managing the team, and you're, let's say, winning customers, and he's covering the operation. It's something else to move the same person into a fully customer-facing role where they need to win customers and so forth. And just because they, in my view, just because somebody can be a great right-hand person to you, doesn't mean that he can be autonomous and do it on his own overnight. And I did make the mistake to underestimate that effort and to just assume that because we have a great relationship and that everything is going well between us and I trust the person, he can do it from a competence perspective. And yeah, there were a couple of situations in these 20 years. And well, all I can say is that it was a mistake on my side because, again, I was blinded by maybe seeing myself in that person and saying, yeah, if I could do it, they can do it, and I'm here. And yeah, and now what I realize is that you need to really make a plan when somebody takes on new responsibilities to make sure that they have the right training and support, and also that you monitor it frequently enough so you don't have surprises like 3 months in. It's like, whoa, what happened here? And it's kind of late already to react.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
I have an example. We did so many stupid things and we did so many mistakes that so we kind of did them all. We have an example like this. I think it was back in maybe 8 or 9 years ago. when we were overwhelmed in business, and this German guy shows up, like a really good, very good manager, you know, and he knew so much more than we knew. He knew so much marketing. He knew P&Ls. He knew how to make a pricing, you know, with all the costs. And we were amazed of how many things he knew. He knew how to negotiate with the Chinese. He knew a lot of the things that we didn't know. We were like amazed. We thought it was God sent. And so we gave him a lot of autonomy, a lot of decision. We let our young team in his hands. And let me see if one of them is here. No, so I can tell. Okay, so we were like, he's a godsend, you know what I mean? But in the end, it showed that he destroyed the culture, he destroyed the values. For him, it was more important the results, the objectives, and not the people and the values. And we had to choose. Do we want to have a lot of money, fast, very professional, or we want to do things God's way? And unfortunately, I mean, we had to fire him. He was very intimidating. He said he was very intimidating, very harassing. It was our first real, facing a manager. He was very professional, but it's always a choice. And what do you choose? And how do you make these decisions? So it was a big lesson for us back then. And I think I think culture is more important and values are more important than being very professional. And even now, I always have these questions. And when I go into the guild shares groups, you know, my colleagues tell me, you should hire good managers from outside. And I had this question to God in the last 2 weeks. You know, I really need a good manager right now, but I don't seem to be able to find him. And, you know, God, how do I do this? Do I promote from within, or do I hire know-how? And, you know, it was God sent Chris Allen, who reminded me that, you know, who are the discipleship of Jesus? They were fishermen, right? So they didn't seem to be very capable. So my understanding...
Definitely not polished.
Yes, definitely not polished. So for me, it was a big insight because actually people only need to have the right heart and to be available, and for sure they can grow. And this is where I am now.
Thank you for sharing.
Well, in my case, I think I made such a decision too late. I think the authority is rather gained than given. It comes with responsibility, but I had in our company, I think people who proven to be very loyal. They were willing to learn, and for some reason, I realized that I was too late when I was overwhelmed, almost like burning out. And right next to me, there were people willing to take responsibilities. And what helped me understand this was a good friend of mine said, well, if you as a CEO build a company in a way that it doesn't run without you, then you build it wrong. So whatever you do, do it in a way that can run without you. Well, I never thought it this way, but it helped me realize the potential around me in the key people who proven to be with integrity, with values, committed, willing to grow. They like actually to take responsibility, and very often I probably overtook that responsibility wrongly and put it on my shoulder, and while they had an additional bandwidth, I was at the limit of like burning out.
This is so common.
So in that case, I think I was rather late to even empower more, and surprisingly, they were actually happier that they took more responsibility, and that to me was a waking up moment.
I have one more question before we get to the Q&A, and this is sometimes the inevitable when you have the wrong people in the wrong seat. What would you say are some key indicators that you have the wrong person in a C-suite role, and any tips or tricks that you could share with everybody around what were some things that you found healthy or helpful in letting a C-suite person either go, or sometimes it could be a demotion, I guess, but removing somebody out of a C-suite role. If anybody has experience doing that or would like to share about how did you know and how did you make that transition with that person?
Yeah, for me, an example was, you can have somebody who has competence, but I think the biggest issue is character. Now, also, lack of competence can take people to burnout and to being overwhelmed, so that's also an issue to solve. But when somebody is acting in a way which is undermining the organization, so I do believe in autonomy, I don't believe in independence and in creating your own kingdom. And when you see people really working their way in a way that creates their own kingdom within an organization, and it's no longer about the organization, but about their fiefdom or whatever, that can create toxicity and big issues. And then there are other people who have a problem with that, who are affected, who are, should I say, victims, or who are impacted by that.
Yes.
And there were cases when I tried to coach somebody in a certain situation which was not a healthy one, and I became pastoral to the person I was coaching, but I forgot that there were other people affected around, which were suffering because I was not taking the right action. So I think the sign is, not open communication and trying to create your own, let's say, little kingdom there. And then the way to solve that, at least in actually somebody asked me, not actually my wife asked me, have you ever really fired somebody too quickly? And I never did, I have to say. I always took time, maybe too late. But even then, I'm happy of one thing which I did in a certain situation, because it was a challenging situation. And I had an honest discussion with that person saying, look, this is going to be challenging. Let's promise each other that we'll be honest to each other in this period and see how things will develop. And then when it happened, basically both of us came on the same day to the same conclusion that it's better to stop. So it was not unilateral, it was not a shock to any of us, and we have good relationships, and I'm very happy for that. But we had to come at one day to the conclusion that this is not working, and to have a mature discussion about it, and to treat each other with dignity, and to part ways, basically.
Yeah, I like what you said there, where one, it shouldn't be surprising, right? And I think I loved what you said about setting the bar and the goal and saying, this is the time period we're going to pursue this goal, and we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to support you. But then as that date gets closer, they are also not surprised when it comes to them not being at the company anymore. Yeah. Anybody else? What are some key indicators or,
Well, I've had that exact same situation, Daniel. And so I'll add one more thing, I think, to competence and character, which I think are super important. Another one that it's important for us as a growing company is like self-awareness. And so for my last company that I was at, I was employee number 60, and we grew to about 350 people. I joined the leadership team, and we're about 250. And necessarily, as the company grew, our person who was in the CFO seat was more of a controller. They were more of an accountant, and we were a trading firm. So we were competing with Goldman Sachs. We were competing with Bank of America and JP Morgan. And so as we got bigger and our competition was sharper, we needed a more strategic CFO. And so Ed, our CFO at the time, actually was very self-aware. So just like Daniel was saying, this was not a surprise to him, even in this case, where he was like, yeah, this role has actually outgrown me. The company outgrew me. I was right for the role for a time, and now I'm actually not the right person to be the CFO to carry things forward. And we actually had the same exact situation with our chief technology officer, because at that time also all of the efficiencies, or at least the vast majority of the efficiencies in the trading industry, were from technology. It was how can we make better trades with technology and how can we make those better trades faster? And so that required an entirely different type of staff than people who were coding in SQL for 20 years. We had to have a completely different kind of technology staff. And so we needed somebody who had done that before at another company because the person that we had just wasn't as exposed to the other things that were out there to, again, compete with Goldman Sachs, right? And so we're this small trading firm in Chicago, so we've got to have that edge there. So I think it was like self-awareness in those seats too, where as those conversations were taking place, it was not a surprise to them. And there are plenty of other companies that they could work for that needed what they had. But to compete, have that be the edge that we were competing on, we couldn't keep them in those roles.
Well, allow me to be different. I think it's challenging and we have to fire quick. You asked about letting somebody go. But what if when we face the situation where we are let go, when somebody in the C-suite leaves the company? So I faced, we are not at the level at too many C-suite, but we have a couple of people that I think are really the part of the engine of the company. I was on a business trip for a couple of weeks. When I got back, probably the most important person said, well, I decided to leave. And, well, two things came to my mind. Yes, they say there are no irreplaceable people. Well, in that case, would have been an extremely difficult loss for the company. And we decided to be very open, and my colleague said, you know, I love everything, but, and this was a few years ago, said, and by the way, in Moldova, especially outside Chisinau, people have only two choices. Either is the capital or Europe or somewhere abroad. So my colleague said, you know, what made me choose to leave is I don't want to leave too late, and he meant the country. He said, everybody's leaving, I decided to stay, but I don't see really exactly where I can be in a few years, so just in all honesty, I want to even provide a better future for my kids, and I decided to leave now. So what do you do in that situation? Normally, you don't want to stay with people who are half-heartedly in your company, so very painful, I'll accept it. But we decided to be very transparent about it. Since we were very closely connected with the Netherlands, with the German, I offered him a position to go maybe to be part of our business there, which is not typical. Long story short, he was there for 9 months, although we could have parted right there at the time. Well, now he's with us. He experienced leaving. He lived for 9 months in the Netherlands, also with us. And he actually so much appreciated it. And now he said, you know, I made my choice. I returned to Moldova. And now we are talking maybe even creating another company just dealing with construction besides the factory, another development company. And he's actually one of the C-suite. But I was in a position that I was let go. I felt like fired by somebody who is in a critical position. But I don't think I did a good job preparing for that. Yeah. What helped, though, and I think maybe that's also a very spiritual moment, because what made him come back to Moldova after nearly a year, experiencing an amazing country like Netherlands, said, God revealed me that I still want my kids to be Moldovans, not in a different country. So I think that was a spiritual part of it, and there is more to it. But I think preparing for such a season when somebody in a key position may leave the company, but also be very transparent and provide what key people need in their life. If the company interests intersect with the person's interest, I think we should be very open about it.
That's really good insight. All right, so we're going to switch modes here. Can we actually get one more microphone? Oh, yes, thank you. All right, so we want to open it up for questions. I know there's a lot of people I've talked to this week that are here in this room right now who are going through these types of transitions and questions around leadership and hiring in high-level employees or raising people to take those roles. And so from anything that you've heard here today, if you have any questions, please raise your hand and we'll get you the mic. So we have one right here at this table. Yep.
how do you look, as for Oana and Anatol, how do it look the first top position that you had, and how do I look overall the indicators that you put it to him? Like, how was the first KPIs, if you or how the first goals that you put it on that?
Just to make sure, do you mean for a
top position?
For a C-level role.
So in order to answer that question, and the question, how do you attract as a small company a top CEO, we usually promise them profit sharing at first, and then if they would reach an objective, they could have shares out of the company. We've never reached the part with shares because the profit wasn't reached, yes. So one of the KPIs would be profit, P&L, you know, reaching one of other KPIs would be a target of, I don't know, from 1 million to 2 million in rentals, especially when you are a startup, you know, you can double, triple every year, like business development, you know, reaching more clients, developing the fleet and stuff like this. Each of them have different KPIs, depending on the phase of the business and what do you want from it. But one of the main things would be profit, in my perspective.
Yeah.
Well, in my case, being a very small company, we had some KPIs, but 3 probably things. One is the business needs certain competence. So in our case, was the top position was very technical. So he needed to bring the competence. Second, definitely to affect the bottom line, which is pretty much the same. The other thing for me was very important, how he would affect the culture of the company. And I think it's part of our DNA, again, referring to the heritage from the Soviet Union. We don't have corporate culture at all. The boss knows everything, he decides everything, and when you invite people, say, I sometimes even, when we have company meetings, I address to everyone, well, this is actually not my company, it's our company. And they are looking, well, okay. But they got to feel it. And for me, it's very important that top position will represent the values, and he will be even a culture builder if possible. You cannot expect all of these things from engineers, but at least I was blessed with such a person who contributes to that. But to me, it was an extremely valuable and non-negotiable part.
In defense of engineers, I'm an engineer, just.
That is the end of his comment.
So there's no defense?
In big companies?
It looks the same in big companies. Yeah. Yes. All right. We have another question right here. Yes.
I would have a question in 2 parts. First for Derek and Daniel. Daniel, you mentioned about seeing the difference in a CXO, if it's autonomous or bringing his own kingdom. So if you can, in your experience, seeing many people in these positions, if you saw some specific signs or traits of a toxic person like this, and how can you notice that from the beginning or very beginning, not to do that too late, if you can be more specific. And the second part is for Oana, because you had this experience. In what way that manager was toxic? And a provocative question for you, how did you know that your culture was good enough and he's not very professional? That's my question. And or if you couldn't negotiate, I don't know what kind of it was, an ethics or whatever, but how that you couldn't negotiate with him not to change that much the culture, being so competent. So there's regarding to the toxic things.
Great. Why don't you start? Yeah.
Okay, so a few signs that you might see. What I've seen, and this is what I'm going to see now, is a combination of multiple persons. So if somebody's trying to figure out who I'm talking about, I hope you won't manage. But I think it's about, you know, demanding personal loyalty or trying to create personal loyalty to their person and not to the mission of the company. And even trying to undermine that person speaking freely to others. Actually, I heard somebody even ask a person, are you with me or are you with them? Like, as if we're two different organizations. Well, we're one organization, you know? So when people start, you know, like creating, hey, allegiances, now you owe me because I put you in this position, or when they try to put their own people or family in their team and do not, and if you challenge them, they don't see the problem with it. I think these are some of the signs. So, you know, lack of honest communication, communicating mostly with the people in their department, not being, let's say, good colleagues. Because what I noticed, and sorry, I'm going to make a short theory, you know, leaders have three types of relationships: with the people in their team, with their peers, and with their bosses. Now, what's interesting, most leaders are quite good at leading other people, because that's why they're leaders. So when you see how well they can run a team, usually they can run a team. Also, most leaders know how to communicate with their bosses. Now, some of them are more open or less open, but they know how to do it technically. Where you see character issues is how they relate to their peers. Because how do I relate to you if I might not need you? I mean, you don't work for me, you're not my boss, so who are you? And that's where character shows in how you communicate and cooperate with people that you might not need now. But that's the test of character, in my view, to see their side peer relationships. So, long story short, when you're not a good team player to your peers, when you try to make the ones below you have a personal allegiance to you or owe you, or even put trusted people or family members or something in that team, and when you communicate selectively to your own leader and you try to force some things, I think those are some signs. And you know, with what I know now, I should in some cases have acted sooner, because again, and I'll tell you one more example. I was in the army, and when I was in the army in my 20s, one of the most frustrating things for me in the army was that everybody was treating all as if we were thieves. I mean, there was no implicit trust. Everybody was assumed guilty until proven innocent, not assumed innocent until proven guilty. And I was like, you know, that hurts, and I don't want to live my life like that. So my style has been to start from a trusting position to people, and sometimes I was naive, you know, but I did make mistakes. I was usually making mistakes on the naive or idealistic side, and sometimes seeing myself in others and assuming that they have the same motives like I do or something. And with Cuminte de pe urmă, with the mind I have now, there's a nice expression in Romanian that with my latest mind version, with the mind I have now, I'd be a bit more rational or realistic. I don't want to become cynical, but I do want to be more realistic about people. But nevertheless, this is what you see. People basically building their own things and kind of forgetting about the company and about the objectives that we're trying to reach, and just thinking about their own little sphere. Thanks.
So to give some examples, he responded very well. So he would be in a meeting with all the sellers, and he would put his feet on the table. Everyone would stand up all the time, and he would sit like this, and this is how a meeting would go. Then when we left for US for 2 weeks, he told the whole company that we want to withdraw from the leadership of the company, and now he needs to take over, and that everyone has to be obedient to him and needs to report him everything that is going on and not telling us anything when we go back. So these are one of the signs. To be more specific, I could tell you I could tell you more. Manipulation, intimidation, aggression. You know, these are not good things. That, and I think we were weak, but for sure after our culture has strengthened, because you know, culture is everything that you do and don't do in a company. When you decide letting such a performant manager go, that speaks loudly, more loudly than anything of what matters in a company. And if we are saying that it's all about the people, then we really need to mean it, you know, and not doing what the people want, but what the people need. So, did I answer, or did I answer the question?
Well, somehow, but how could that person be so performant? I mean, you said
He
it was very performant.
Yes, because
well, that must be genius somehow.
He was a genius in my perspective. Because with manipulation, and you can do a lot of things. You should see him negotiating. He told everything that you wanted to hear, but we couldn't have provided those things. But that doesn't mean that he didn't promise them to the suppliers, to the clients, and stuff like this. There are these kind of people, you know, and for sure you can go along with it sometime until they figure it out that we are not there yet, and maybe you can get there at some point, but again, are you truthful, are you honest, you know, how do you want to do things? For us, it meant so much slower, so much more long time, but it was a choice.
And maybe just a quick remark to your question, how can somebody who is toxic create good results? And there's a book which was quoted by Harvard Business Review, Haskell, who says basically that a good culture will lead to performance, but there are situations where you can have high performance without a good culture by somebody forcing himself to, so in that sense, that's where you see people getting to burnout, people being used, people being sacrificed for performance. So you can have performance without a good culture, but the impact will be on the people. On the other hand, I think when you have a healthy culture, that should pretty naturally lead to a good performance. When you have transparency and ownership and clarity, I think in the end you do get to good performance. But again, short term, and I agree with Oana, you can get somebody who can be toxic, and this is the famous challenge of a manager, which is some of these people are called, well, there's a phrase for that, but basically it's about toxic high performers. And this is the test of a manager. Would you fire somebody who has great performance, but is toxic as a culture? And yeah, when you do that, it's a strong sign that it's not just about performance, it's also about the culture.
And yes, when we fired him, we also...
Brilliant jerk. That's the official name of that. Sorry.
Me and Ruben also had a little bit of fight, you know, because I was telling him these are not good signs. He wanted the results. You need the results. You need the money. It's always attention. It's always pressure. It's always, you know, and I was saying, no, but this is not good. You know, we're not heading into the right direction. It's never easy decision, or at least for us, it wasn't.
All right, let's go on. Yes, right here. And then we'll get you next, yeah? Hi. We'll do these two questions and then we'll be done.
I'm a psychologist, and as I know, values are important, also character, and also abilities and competencies. But also what is important in a team at the C-level, it's the personality and emotional patterns. So you can have a narcissistic personality person or an OCD personality person that can have great results, but without flexibility or without caring for people. So I want to ask you, because we know that if you want to have a good synergy between C-level management and middle management and middle management and the team and the management and the business, if you thought about, or if you are using psychological assessment tools, or if you are using emotional management trainings for managers.
Well, as somebody who's married to a psychiatrist, I'm thoroughly analyzed and assessed. And that has been a great help.
Do you ever win a fight?
And that has been a great help for me because, again, I think I mentioned it before, but to make it very short, I started as an introvert, still am an introvert. I'm a functional extrovert, so people think I'm an extrovert, but after I finish this, I'm going to go in a corner for half an hour and just be with myself, you know? Kidding. But I think it's very important for us to understand where we're coming from and what gives us energy. And in that sense, yes, we use that. Now there are different ways to do it, and I have a couple of them which I'm aware of. But yes, I do think it's important to be aware because my motto is personality is not a destiny. So the fact that you are introvert or extrovert or a certain type of, personality is not in itself a destiny, but you need to be aware of that. And you need to make sure that you have the right team around you to balance you. And in that sense, yes, to make a short answer, we use that. I think it's important. The awareness is important. But at the same time, it's an ongoing process. You always discover something new. And to give a quote, which also has to do with spiritual implications of a business, I heard a nice quote, "New levels, new devils." Especially when you move to a new challenge, you also need to work on you because there's something in you which can be triggered by that new challenge, and you need to be healed more so that you are more capable to help others. And this is what I've learned so far in almost 30 years is that it's an ongoing process. And whenever you need to step into something new, it's a new level of self-awareness, repentance, change, awareness, and adapting to that situation.
All right, let's move on to our last question, just because I know we're a little bit over on time.
Thank you. On a lighter note, I was thinking about one book, so I thought I'd tell you that the title is Surrounded by the Idiots. So please do read that. I think maybe that can be helpful. On the other side, my question is, what you really think because we just changed the structure and toward the C-suite, and I was thinking, what could be the way forward? In terms of capacity building tools or assessment tools or professionally, how a CEO can look what he's not seeing or what he needs to look at the early stage. So you can suggest some tools or way forward at this stage?
Yeah, so basically what are the assessment tools that you could use or ways to know if that person is right or ready for a C-level role at your company? Or maybe just how do you know?
That's a tough question, but I hate silence, so I'll give it a go, Adil. Maybe to follow on from this last question, we do also use behavioral assessments, and that's an intimidating question to answer also when you're a psychologist, so you can tell us all the ways that we're using them wrong. But I would say most assessment tools, and I'll just speak for the American workplace, because that's what I'm most familiar with, are completely misapplied. And so I don't know if I can answer your question about what tool you should be using, but I think when applying a tool, just make sure you really understand the assumptions and things that are going into whatever the results of that assessment are. And just as maybe an example, so using something like predictive index, culture index, Myers-Briggs, whatever you want to call it, that people apply all the time in the American workplace, most young employees feel more confined than empowered by those tools. So they see who that tool is telling them to be because they're still learning who they are. And so your managers actually have to be really equipped to understand what the results of that assessment are telling you so that you can actually apply it in an effective way and have it start a conversation. I don't know if there's a single tool that I would probably trust to be like, ding, 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 boom, this is the person I should pick, but there's probably tools that could help you generate a conversation. That's helpful.
I'll just try to give 1 minute answer to that. I think the tools are a great thing for creating awareness, but most tools are developed in a secular context, so they look especially at our soul level. Now, as Christians, we know that below the soul, there's also the spiritual world. So let's say you can figure out everything about his personality. He's introvert, extrovert, driven, passive, whatever, thinker, you name it. But if he has an unsolved heart issue, if he's been wounded of something. I mean, you can talk to the best person, but he might be triggered and be afraid in certain situations, and it's not logical what's happening. And I heard a nice phrase, again from my wife, which says, people get hurt in relationships and people get healed in relationships. So I think beyond knowing the people, I think the question is, how can we love them the best? And I think our calling as Christian leaders is to be aware of them, but not to misuse the information against them. Actually, Tim Keller has a great way of saying this, that on one hand we want to be known by others, but we're afraid to be known by others. Because if you know everything about me, the question is, how will you use that information about me? And I think we as Christians, God can give us, through tools or through insight or through revelation, some information about people, but then the question is, what do we do with it? And are we the kind of people who love the other person so that we use that information in the right way by promoting them or putting them in a different position or sometimes even letting them go, because that might be a way to love them and others, to protect others from them. But again, in my view, I don't put my trust in a tool. I do put my trust in God's revelation, which includes tools, but I don't think we can just rely on a tool to be great leaders. I think without prayer and dependence on God, we will not make it. And it's a hard job in a way. I mean, not complaining, but it's a great calling at the same time, and it can only be done together with God and depending on Him. Thank you.
All right. Well, let's give a round of applause for our wonderful panelists. Thank you for coming to this session. I feel like I should be giving you instructions for what's next, but I don't know. So if you guys have any questions, these guys are here to be able to talk.